please take a moment right now to hit like, subscribe, and share.
Especially share. That's the big one.
I grew up in a small town in the Ottawa Valley, and one of the things that always seemed a special treat back in those days was when our teacher would bring a film projector into the class, spool up a reel of film with excellent projectionist skills worthy of any cinema, and play a movie in class. Usually it was some nature documentary or maybe a historical drama produced by the National Film Board of Canada about Lord Durham or David Thompson. The films were never great, but the experience was fun. Having our classrooms turned into little movie theaters, complete with the clack, 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 clack sound of the projector and the flickering of the light. It was pretty cool, honestly. As a teacher now, I wish I could still do that. On much more rare occasions, classes might combine to watch a movie together, but on one absolutely wild day, the entire school was brought into the school gymnasium to watch a film together, and it was going to be an actual Disney film. An older movie, sure, and a live-action adventure, not animated, but that was okay. This was a one-of-a-kind experience at our school, one maybe never done before, and if I had to guess based on how it turned out, probably never done again. If you're thinking now that something went wrong during the screening, you'd be right, because somewhere along the line, someone made the decision to show the film Old Yeller to the students of our school. You know the one. Boy meets dog. Boy loves dog. Dog loves boy. Dog fights bear. Dog saves family from a wolf. Dog gets rabies and goes mad. Boy shoots dog through vision blurred by his own traumatized tears. Well, Tommy Kirk as Travis wasn't the only youngster crying uncontrollably that day. The older ones saw it coming. They knew what was going to happen. The younger ones, they got it last, overwhelmed not only by what they were seeing on screen, but also the large room filled with crying children behind them. I was in grade 4 at the time, I think. Total waterworks. Hundreds of kids convulsing and ugly crying, dumbfounded teachers wondering how they could possibly fix this. Now, if something like this happened today, it would be in the papers. It would be on the internet, parents and educators expressing outrage and righteous fury that the children were traumatized by the emotions churned up by the film. Someone would almost certainly be disciplined, if not fired. There would be investigations. It would become a meme, and people would demand restitution and comeuppance for those they deemed responsible. But in the moment, back then, on that day, eventually, we stopped crying. We went back to class, we did social studies. And by the time the bell rang, my friends and I were more concerned about getting a pickup road hockey game going than what happened in the gym. I doubt I even mentioned it to my parents that night. It just came and went, as things seem to do when you're young. And now, many years later, I can look back on it and say that the event in question absolutely did nothing to quell my love of old movies. Hello, film historians. I'm Derek and I love old movies. We've got Sam the sidekick here.
Hello, and welcome to episode 54.
Your first episode as a university student.
Yes, I guess that's true.
How's that been going?
Not so bad. I think it's going to be a lot of work, though.
All the more reason to spend some downtime recharging, watching and enjoying some old movies.
I can't think of anything better.
So what do we have today?
Well, we're looking at a curious little film that was released in cinemas, but was actually made from the recut episodes of a television show that had already aired.
I did not know that was a thing. I know that in the 1970s, the Planet of the Apes TV show was later recut into made-for-TV movies that even had little titles that were similar to the original cinematic releases. But I didn't know that sort of thing was actually making it into theaters in the 1950s.
Well, it was, and we're going to find out all about it today as we take a look at a live-action adventure movie from Walt Disney Studios, 1955's Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, starring Fess Parker and Buddy Ebsen.
That sounds great. Can't wait to get into it. Why don't we start off with some business?
So, business number one, thanks for being here.
Yep.
Thanks for listening. We love watching these films and chatting about them for you. It's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And you know what else? We love hearing from you. So if you ever have like an idea or a thought or a suggestion for us, a film we could cover, or a part of the film you'd like to hear us talk about, let us know.
Also, if you'd like to read a cold open for the podcast, maybe talking about a nostalgic or formative experience you had watching movies, get in touch and let's make that happen right away.
You don't even have to have come from a small town in the Ottawa Valley.
But bonus points if you did.
Always. And then if you're looking for something fun to do right now, or maybe later in the weekend, why not check us out on the socials?
Why not indeed? After all, we are on the Facebook.
I Love Old Movies, the podcast.
The Instagram.
At I Love Old Movies, the podcast.
El Twitter.
At ILOM podcast.
And the good old-fashioned email.
I Love Old Movies, the podcast at gmail.com.
All one word.
And of course, you should also do what all the cool kids do, and you know what I'm going to say, that is Pet the Rock. And by this we mean head on over to petrockradio.ca to listen to amazing local web-based radio programming. It's got fantastic music, it's got previous episodes of our show, it's got incredible hosts, and we are broadcast once, twice, thrice a week.
Monday and Saturday and Sunday.
Come for the music, stay for the podcasts.
We'll link that for you in the description.
All right, are you set to go tame the American frontier in the early 1800s?
And how? I've got my coonskin cap right here. Hit the music.
One-time journalist, stage actor, and leading man in smaller feature films in the early 1930s, Norman Foster veered off from his acting career to make it as a director, and definitely enjoyed some success. Foster was fairly active on the Broadway stage, literally working his way from crowd scenes to leading roles, while also writing a few plays along the way. He met his first wife, Claudette Colbert, while working on Broadway, and he appeared with her on stage. After moving to Hollywood, he appeared in 41 films over a 7-year span. They really churned him out back then. Although he was quite busy, the films weren't especially memorable. Titles like Alias the Doctor, Walls of Gold, and Ladies Crave Excitement fill his resume, and let's just say that Clark Gable wasn't worried. Foster gave up on acting to focus on directing, helming several entries in both the Mr. Moto and Charlie Chan film series. And along the way, he also directed films and television shows about such exceptional characters as the Cisco Kid, Zorro, General George Custer, the Green Hornet, and Batman. And also, he even fell in with Orson Welles when he directed Journey into Fear, which featured Mercury Theatre actors, Welles included. By the 1950s, Foster was mostly a television director. His work on Davy Crockett was intended as a series of television specials, but ironically served as one of his last film credits. He worked steadily as a director until the late 1960s, and really, his career serves as the perfect example of making the hard choices to do the things you love. When Foster transitioned from acting to directing, his weekly pay at the studio dropped approximately 80%. And I gotta say, I love doing a lot of things, but I don't think I'd take an 80% pay cut to do them. Foster was quite a guy. Norman Foster died in 1976 at the age of 72.
The writer is Thomas W. Blackburn. After helping his father and uncle with different farming and business work as a child, Blackburn graduated from Glendale Junior College in California. After his graduation, he started working as a ghostwriter for authors Harry F. Olmsted and Ed Earl Repp. As he started writing under his own name more and more, Blackburn's name became well known from 1940 to 52 for the pulp fiction he wrote. Although he did release a number of fiction novels, a majority of his work was published in magazines such as 10 Story Western, Star Western, and Dime Western magazine. Blackburn eventually got into screenwriting in 1947 with Killer at Large, and was pretty active through the 50s, writing a few TV series and some films such as Sierra Passage in 1950, Riding Shotgun 1954, and Westward Ho! The Wagons in 1956. His career slowed down considerably in the late 50s and into the 60s, when he mostly just worked on TV shows such as Maverick and The Virginian. His last credited work was on the show Run for Your Life in 1968, but he did provide some uncredited work on the film Santee in 1973. Ending his career with 32 writing credits, Blackburn died in 1992 at the age of 79.
Fess Parker was born in 1924, and his early dream was to become a pilot. His height worked against him here, and he ended World War II in the Marine Corps as a radio operator. Discharged in 1946, Fess enrolled in university, using his final year of funding from the GI Bill to study for a master's degree in theater history at the University of Southern California. Small roles for several years greeted Fess as he turned his eyes to film and television, and on his agent's advice he accepted a bit part that would change his career in 1954's sci-fi schlocko film Them. Walt Disney himself screened Them as he was evaluating James Arness to cast as the lead in an upcoming project, but he was so taken by Fess Parker in his one scene that he promptly cast him as Davy Crockett. And this was a tremendous hit, and Fess was subsequently cast in several more films. However, he complained that he was always basically playing the same role. And after Disney refused to lend Fess out to co-star with John Wayne in The Searchers, Fess left Disney. Parker then had roles in several films, mostly all with Paramount, until once more he was cast in a career-changing role, this time in television, in 1964's Daniel Boone. Fess became so synonymous with his work in Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone that not only is he best known for those two roles, but most times, if you're on Google and you search out pictures of those two men, you will find as many images of Fess Parker in costume as you will the actual people. Now that is brand recognition. As his acting career died down, Parker dabbled in politics, but more successfully ran a massive vineyard and winery. Fess Parker died in 2010 at the age of 85.
We touched briefly on Buddy Ebsen back in our episode on The Wizard of Oz. Buddy, of course, was the original actor cast as the Tin Man, the same actor who began filming but was so allergic to the loose aluminum powder used in the Tin Man's makeup that he was hospitalized and nearly died. But let's take a closer look. That being said, we've only got so much time, and for an actor who is behind only Mickey Rooney and Bob Hope for having the longest acting career in the business, we're obviously going to miss out on some stuff. If you decide that you need more in-depth knowledge of the very interesting career of Buddy, well, enjoy that rabbit hole. Buddy Ebsen was born in 1908 to German parents who had emigrated to America. His mother was a painter and his father was a choreographer. Buddy began his career as a dancer after his dreams of a medical career were scuttled due to family financial issues. Buddy's early career saw a lot of dancing and musical roles. He danced with such famous gals as Judy Garland and Shirley Temple, to name just a couple. After Buddy recovered from the makeup snafu in Oz, he was embroiled in a contract dispute with MGM. The studio wanted to sign him to a 7-year deal that would pay $2,000 a week. However, he turned it down as a condition of the contract was that the studio would control every aspect of his career. This rejection led to MGM blackballing Buddy as much as possible over the following 20 years. While on a hiatus from acting, he actually taught seamanship to naval officer candidates, and he eventually joined the Coast Guard. 1949 saw Buddy return to acting and spent the next several years doing television. Notably, he co-starred with Fess Parker in Davy Crockett, swallowing his disappointment as he had hotly been in the running for the lead. He spent most of this time in westerns, as did Fess Parker, or rural setting shows. However, a half exception to that was 1961's Breakfast at Tiffany's, where he played the husband that Audrey Hepburn deserts. Despite MGM's blackballing, Disney always viewed Buddy as something of a good luck charm. It was Disney, of course, who cast Buddy in Davy Crockett, but even during his most blackballed years, Disney managed to keep him pretty busy. Between 1929 and 1939, animators at Disney recorded Buddy dancing in front of a grid and used that to choreograph Mickey Mouse's dance steps for the Silly Symphony cartoons. Buddy was seriously considering retiring from acting in 1962, right up until the producers for the Beverly Hillbillies sent him a script and the offer of what is likely his most famous role, Jed Clampett. Had Buddy actually retired at that point, his time would likely have been filled with even more of the hobbies he continued during his acting career. He was an accomplished songwriter, as well as a playwright, having at least 5 of his original plays produced. And he is also the author of several books, his most successful one being a romance by the name of Kelly's Quest, which came out 2 years before his death in 2003 at the age of 95.
Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, was not originally made as a movie. Rather, it was 5 hour-long segments that originally aired on Walt Disney's Disneyland. In fact, these 5 episodes are considered the first miniseries in television history, and that's coming from a time before the term miniseries had even been coined. The first 3 episodes were called Davy Crockett Indian Fighter, Davy Crockett Goes to Congress, and Davy Crockett at the Alamo. Those 3, based on their popularity, were recut, spliced together into one film called Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, and released in theaters.
I can't believe it was successful like that.
It was totally successful. As popular as the TV show was, the film was equally as popular in theaters.
And this was still in the early days of television, wasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Although Disney had a vision of how popular they wanted the Davy Crockett episodes to be, network executives were still struggling to grasp the true potential power of television to reach an audience. The Davy Crockett episodes far exceeded expectations. And this is both in terms of the popularity of the show on television with its audience, but also in the secondary market of merchandise sales.
That sort of thing was really taking off in the 1950s. Elvis had a lot of merchandise, for example.
And before him, so did Davy Crockett. Within a year, over $300 million worth of merchandise had been purchased. And that's in 1955 money.
So are we talking coonskin caps and toy tomahawks?
Pretty much, yeah. And despite the sales, it didn't work out that well for Fess Parker. His contract didn't allow him to make residuals off of merchandise sales. And in retrospect, that contract oversight probably cost him millions.
Oof.
So successful were the episodes and the film release that the other 2 episodes were cut together into a feature film as well. And Disney began working on producing episodes and features about other historical characters from Americana.
Were they as successful as this?
No. In Davy Crockett, Disney had caught lightning in a bottle, a perfect combination of a mythological character, a perfect actor for the role, an exciting new medium to get the show across to an audience, and most critically, an audience that was hungry for exactly what the Davy Crockett character offered, a heroic American from a simpler time. What's the tail of the tape on this one, Sam?
Okay, so we have a 6.9 on IMDb. Audience score is 77% on Rotten Tomatoes, and the tomato meter is 100%. The film won no awards and can be watched on Disney+.
And we start off with a Disney disclaimer about prejudices and this film being a product of its time.
I know these are things, but I've never seen one come up. That's very interesting.
Tennessee frontiersmen Davy Crockett and George Russell are part of a volunteer force working with General Andrew Jackson, who is leading an army in the Creek War. Davy and George help win an important battle, but then the volunteers leave to go home, provisioning their homesteads for the winter before returning to fight.
When they return, they find Jackson's forces weakened, sick, low on men and supplies, and stuck in a swamp.
The glamour of army life.
The men disobey orders to scout for Creek warriors, and George is captured. Davy challenges their chief, Red Stick, to a one-on-one fight.
They go at it with tomahawks, but the fight is honorable. Davy wins and makes a pitch to the Creek, who are very suspicious, to sign a peace treaty, which they reluctantly, but inevitably, agree to.
After the war, Davy and George scout new territory that is open to settlers. Davy must beat local bully and blowhard Bigfoot Mason in a shooting competition to claim some land to build on.
And what a shot. Davy hits the target once, and then he puts his next shot right into the hole his first musket ball made.
This is the black powder version of Robin Hood splitting the arrow.
Bigfoot is hella pissed about this, and he goes off to sulk with his cronies. And by sulk, I mean beating up and running off local Cherokee settlers, refusing to accept their land claims. And then he takes their land and sells it.
Davy hears about this, takes the job as local magistrate, and heads to talk things over with Bigfoot. And by talk things over, I mean punch the crap out of him while George shoots one of his cronies.
Now well established by his war fame, his fairness fame, his punch-out local bullies fame, Davy runs for state legislature against some crooked jerk who is exactly the sort of guy Bigfoot would support. Davy wins and becomes a super popular politician in Nashville.
Then Andrew Jackson comes calling. He wants to be president and wants Davy's help. So Davy runs for Congress, wins, and heads to Washington, where his folksy charm and wisdom make him an excellent congressman.
Davy goes on a successful speaking tour, but that keeps him away from Washington while a contentious bill is being passed that will greatly reduce native sovereignty in the name of Western expansion. He returns in time to not stop the bill, but at least he makes a show out of tearing it in half.
This ends his political career both symbolically and in practicality.
Sometime after, perhaps feeling a bit directionless, Davy decides to head on down to Texas to fight at the Battle of the Alamo. He's accompanied by George, and a kind of cowardly gambler friend named Thimblerig, and a distribed Comanche named Busted Luck.
When they arrive, Colonel Jim Bowie, he of the knife, tells Davy that they are low on food, on ammunition, and are surrounded by an army that outnumbers them maybe 20 to 1.
I don't think Davy is going to grin his way out of this one.
George rides for help, but comes back empty-handed, and despite a valiant defense that repels several Mexican attacks, the Alamo is soon overrun.
Everyone is killed, and the last we see of Davy, he is fighting to his last breath, swinging his rifle as soldiers swarm him. And we fade to a shot of the Texas flag. The end.
That seemed like a really brisk retelling of that battle.
Right? If only there was some kind of nice, long feature film that told that tale.
If only.
Well, we can dream.
You know, this whole thing really didn't feel like much of a film, especially all the end stuff. It really felt more and more like a TV show as it went on.
I know. Maybe as we pro and con this, we can sort it all out.
Let's do it then.
Okay, so as always, we don't actually rate films here on the show. There are no stars, there are no thumbs. We just tell you some things we liked.
Some things we didn't.
And then we recommend whether or not you might enjoy giving this one a watch.
Take it away.
My pros. Number 1, the theme song. It's catchy and memorable. I had a record album of Disney movie theme songs when I was a kid, and the Davy Crockett theme was on it. And I remember singing along with it, belting out that chorus, and I probably haven't heard that song since I was 8. But as we watched the film, I still knew every word and the tune, note for note. That's what catchy and memorable is. Corny? Yes. Hokey? Sure. But a complete and utter earworm in all the best ways. Oh yeah, you betcha. Number 2, the location shooting. Seeing Davy wander through the countryside, up mountains, through swamps, down pathways, and across meadows lends a necessary level of authenticity to things. Seeming in its own way a more down-home, folksy version of a John Ford film, the production choice to have Davy traversing the wide-open spaces, being in nature, makes the whole thing better. In fact, it's when the film moves on to sets, the U.S. Capitol building, the Alamo, etc., that the film seems less genuine, less interesting, and infinitely more cramped. It begins to look more like a TV show and less like a film after all. A frontiersman belongs in the wide open spaces, so it's cool when we get to see that. Number 3, Fess Parker's portrayal of Davy Crockett. While perhaps not the most nuanced bit of acting in the history of cinema, it's not without its charms. Parker embodies, maybe actually defines, the folksy legend of the man, bringing a historical figure to life. He imbues Crockett with such an easy and natural charm, such a palpable inherent goodness. His speech about the Indian Bill is really well done. The man myth this film creates is of a believably noble character, someone you don't even need to root for because you know he's on your side. He's like an 1830s version of Captain America. Charismatic, physically powerful, and endlessly brave. Now my cons. Number 1, the opening scene involving the fight with the bear that was concealed in a bush. Seeing Davy run in and out of that bush, knife in hand, fighting an off-screen bear, it was just ridiculous and cheesy. It was a poor start to things, and it seemed the wrong kind of silly. Number 2, the pacing. As a result of this film being a TV show and then having ample bits cut out for runtime, the pacing of this film is all over the place. It's not paced like a motion picture. Scenes aren't set up, left to develop, and then end. Everything is start, stop, start, stop. There's not a lot of flow, and nothing seems to breathe. I feel like this is a side effect of how this film was actually made out of recut TV episodes. There's just too much left on the cutting room floor. Number 3, the sheer audacity and racism in some of the scenes. Whether or not Davy is debating the merits of what he calls Injun law with a native chief, opining that white law would be good for natives if they'd just give it a chance. Well, Fess Parker is forced into some pretty far-out lines of dialogue that don't play too well today. It's a bit shocking to hear the words used and remembering that this was a prime-time TV show meant for children. It was a different time, for sure. Films based on historical figures, especially ones with, shall we say, exaggerated and legendary reputations, can be a bit dicey. As fact and fiction blur, you wind up with a character and a narrative that you cannot entirely trust. Is this the actual life story of Davy Crockett? Is the portrayal at all true to the actual man? In both cases, likely not. And that's okay. The fictionalized mythical version of the events and the man that we get are interesting enough. They're inspiring enough, and they're entertaining enough to take the viewer along. I can completely understand the appeal of this super patriotic, forward-thinking, humanistic folk hero. In a pre-rock and roll, post-war America, his message was one that certainly would resonate. And the production values of the television episodes would not have been able to be appreciated by television viewers of the day, so the cinematic release would have been an amazing treat for fans. But unfortunately, when you take 150 minutes of storytelling and condense it to a brisk 93, you are going to miss a lot. And as a result, the film suffers from pacing and continuity issues. I don't think the film version is the best way to enjoy these stories, but the original episodes might be. As for the litany of racial slurs directed towards the First Nation people in the first part of this film, I don't know what to say. It was a product of its time, and that time was less sensitive, less enlightened, and less willing to treat non-white characters with the sort of dignity they deserved. The disclaimer said it best: prejudices that were wrong then and are still wrong today. But the work exists, and we owe it to the work, its creators, and ourselves as film historians to watch it, as it was created and intended to be seen. With that, I will give it a provisional watch, but with the caveat that if you can watch the original entire episodes, that would be better. There is no denying that Fess Parker as Davy Crockett created an iconic American screen hero that took the country by storm. So check it out and see why. You're up.
Okay, so my pros. 1. The song. The Davy Crockett song. I really liked it. And honestly, it was my favorite part of the entire film. It was so upbeat and cheerful. Yeah, some of the lyrics weren't great, but the song itself was so catchy. I was definitely bopping along to it every time it played. It was just a lot of fun to listen to, and a great addition to the film. 2. Davy Crockett. So, he was actually kind of cool. When I was first told about the film, I thought he was going to be your typical racist cowboy sort of dude. But he wasn't. He was like a cowboy, but not. He was this really skilled fighter and strategist who everyone liked. He became a politician. He was actually ahead of his time and not super racist. Plus, he fought and killed a bear with nothing but a knife. Needless to say, he was a pretty cool character. And that's it. I don't have another pro for this one. So my cons. 1. The racism. So, yeah. The film was made in the 1950s, so I guess it's only to be expected. But still. Sometimes I'll watch a movie and be like, okay, it has some racism in it. But this was just kind of a racist movie with how they represented the indigenous peoples. I mean, that one scene when one person scraped all of his food together and started shoveling it in his mouth with his hands and making a huge mess? Not really necessary. And yes, I know that was a big part of the film. Davy Crockett spent a lot of time defending the indigenous peoples and arguing that they are in fact people. But there was considerably less of that and more of others being discriminatory in the film. I really would have been on board if Davy Crockett went around punching out all the old racist white dudes. But what can you do? 2. The pacing. It was so fast. Like, distractingly fast. Scenes would just fly by, and I felt like I was missing out on some stuff that could have been drawn out or elaborated on. There were next to no transitions between scenes or locations. They would just sort of happen. And the time skip. Oh my god, I had no idea that several years had passed until someone actually said so. There was no indication that there was a major time jump or anything. It was just treated as if it was directly following the events beforehand. Overall, it was way too fast, and it became kind of confusing to tell when things were happening. 3. The runtime. This sort of goes hand in hand with the pacing, but the film could have been longer. This film was honestly one of the fastest 90 minutes of my life. If the film was longer, it would have given them the opportunity to make scenes longer and draw things out. We could have had nice long transitions with more of the Davy Crockett song. More time would have given the film more space to breathe. Scenes would have felt less cramped, and it wouldn't have felt so rushed. So, this film. It was fine. I've definitely seen worse. Objectively, it's a fine movie. But our pros and cons aren't supposed to be objective. They're supposed to be our personal opinions. Overall, I just did not enjoy the film. Both for the reasons stated in my cons, and just because. I didn't like it, and I didn't like watching it. That being said, theoretically, yes, it's a fine movie, and you're more than welcome to watch it. But I can't really bring myself to recommend a movie that I can only say 2 good things about, no matter how objectively fine it is. For me, unfortunately, this is a don't watch.
All right. Well, as always, that brings us to the end of another episode, and we have a split decision here. A provisional watch from me and a don't watch from you.
I don't know. I get the feeling this is the sort of film of which listeners of a certain age might have really fond memories of. Maybe it just didn't age well. I feel like if this film was made today, it would have been very, very different.
More respective of the native perspective, for sure.
Totally. And there would have been more explosions.
Davy Crockett as directed by Michael Bay.
Or one of those revisionist historical fantasy films like Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Ooh, so like Davy Crockett Monster Slayer.
Davy Crockett Time Traveler.
Davy Crockett versus Aliens.
Davy Crockett frozen in ice and comes back to the modern world to teach a young couple the true meaning of love.
Okay, let's stop before we give someone a terrible idea and a film gets made.
Deal.
So check us out next week. We're going to get our John Wayne on and head into the Wild West.
Sort of keeping with that frontier theme, huh?
No, mere coincidence. It has nothing to do with the fact that John Wayne played Davy Crockett once.
Uh-huh.
For real.
All right. But until then, be sure to watch more movies.
And remember to spread the word about our show. We are not a secret, and you do not have to keep us all to yourselves.
So tell your friends.
Tell your enemies.
You never know. They might like wearing weather-beaten buckskin jackets as much as you do.
Maybe even more. For Sam the Sidekick, I'm Derek, and I love old movies. Additional research for I Love Old Movies, the podcast, is done by Nikki Weatherden. Audio clips come from freefx.co.uk. Images are used through the provisions of fair use, and our theme song, Burning Bridges, is by The Crocs.